Some acts of kindness shine like beacons in the darkness, but sometimes, the very people we lift up are the ones who drag us down. When millionaire Oliver Carter gave the keys of his home to a struggling homeless mother and her children, he thought he was saving them from the storm. But what he returned 2 days later would shake his faith in humanity to the core and teach a lesson he would never forget. Stay with us, because what unfolds next is a journey through trust, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. You are watching Storytelling and Beyond, where true emotions, unforgettable twists, and life-changing lessons come alive. If you love stories that touch the heart and awaken the soul, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family. The rain hammered against the windshield as Oliver Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter, anxiety twisting in his chest. His phone buzzed again with another message from the hospital. His parents were in critical condition after a devastating accident in a distant city. The minutes were heavy, and every second wasted felt like a betrayal to the people who had raised him. He slammed the trunk closed after tossing his overnight bag inside and jumped into his car. As he pulled out of the underground parking lot, a figure caught his eye, small, shivering, barely holding it together against the relentless storm. A woman, clutching 2 small children, huddled beneath the fragile awning of a bus stop, their thin clothes soaked through. For a moment, Oliver hesitated. Time was running out, he needed to be on the road. But something deeper inside him refused to look away. He pulled over. Rolling down the window, he leaned out. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice raised over the drumming rain. The woman flinched but nodded weakly, pulling her children closer. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. It was clear they had nowhere to go. No shelter. No safety. Oliver glanced at the clock. If he left now, he could still make it before dawn. His gaze shifted back to them. He couldn't leave them like this. "Listen," he said, making a decision that surprised even himself, "I'm going out of town. My place, it's warm, it's safe. You can stay there. Just lock up and be careful, all right?" The woman stared at him, disbelief flashing across her face. She clutched the little girl closer, her lips trembling. "You would do that for us," she whispered. Without another word, Oliver pulled the keys from his pocket and leaned out to press them into her cold, shaking hand. "I would," he said simply. "No one deserves to be out here tonight." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she clutched the keys to her chest like a lifeline. Her children huddled closer, sensing the tiny thread of hope being offered. "Thank you," she rasped out, voice cracking under the weight of her gratitude. Oliver gave her the address, a few instructions, and then, with a final nod, drove off into the stormy night. The miles rolled away under his tires, but his mind kept drifting back to them. Would they find warmth? Would they be safe? He pictured the children curled up under blankets, finally able to sleep without fear. It made him drive faster, knowing he had done the right thing even if the world so often rewarded kindness with cruelty. Hours later, as the highway stretched endlessly ahead, Oliver replayed the moment in his mind. Maybe, he thought, the world needed more reckless kindness. Maybe faith in strangers was the only real way to keep humanity alive. He pushed aside the lingering doubts, focusing instead on his destination, on family, on the people waiting for him in a sterile hospital room. He told himself he would return soon, find the woman and her children gone, his home untouched but blessed with the echoes of hope he had offered. But as the rain thickened and the night grew deeper, he had no idea that the act of mercy he had just extended would come back to meet him in ways he could never have imagined. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear, a mixture that tightened Oliver's chest as he rushed through the sterile halls. Machines beeped steadily in the dim light, and nurses moved quietly like ghosts. His heart pounded in his ears when he finally reached his parents' room. Both lay still, bruised and bandaged, but alive, and that was all that mattered. Relief washed over him so fiercely that he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. He stayed by their sides through the night, holding his mother's frail hand and whispering words of comfort to his unconscious father. Time melted away into slow, endless hours of waiting and silent prayers. The days blurred into one another. Oliver barely left their bedside, catching sleep in uncomfortable chairs, eating vending machine sandwiches, and texting updates to distant relatives. Every once in a while, a thought would surface about the woman and her children in his home. He wondered if they were okay, if they had enough food, if they were sleeping peacefully in the safety he had offered. On the fourth morning, the doctors finally gave him the news he had been desperate to hear: his parents were out of danger. It would be a long recovery, but they would heal. Gratitude swelled in his chest, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to truly breathe. He decided to stay one more night, just to be sure they were stable before heading back home. As he sat by the window, watching the evening sky darken into a velvet blue, he imagined walking into his quiet apartment, maybe finding a simple note of thanks left behind by the woman, the children's laughter still echoing faintly in the walls. Maybe they had found a safe place to stay, using the brief shelter he had given them as a stepping stone toward a better life. The idea made him smile to himself. The next morning, he hugged his mother gently and promised he would return soon. He climbed into his car, weary but hopeful, and began the long drive back to the city. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and wet streets that reflected the sunlight. Oliver felt lighter with every mile closer to home, eager to rest, to shower, to step back into the normal life he had momentarily left behind. As he pulled onto his street, a flicker of unease tiptoed through him. He shook it off, blaming the long nights and emotional strain. But when he reached his apartment building, his heart dropped. The front door was slightly ajar. He parked hastily and sprinted up the steps 2 at a time. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing a scene that made his stomach lurch. Furniture overturned, drawers yanked out and emptied onto the floor, shattered glass glinting under the soft light. It looked like a tornado had ripped through his home. Disbelief rooted him to the spot. His television was gone. So were the valuable paintings he had inherited from his grandfather. Jewelry. Cash. Electronics. Even his late grandmother's locket, something worth more to him than any amount of money, had vanished. The betrayal hit him harder than a punch. He stumbled further inside, calling out instinctively, even though he knew no one would answer. The place was deserted. Echoes of a home once full of trust and kindness now rang hollow and broken. A bitter taste filled his mouth as he slumped onto the couch, the one piece of furniture still standing. He buried his face in his hands, grappling with the ugly truth. The woman he had tried to save had gutted his home and disappeared without a trace. His generosity had been repaid with cruelty. And yet, underneath the rising anger, a deeper sadness gnawed at him. It wasn't the stolen items that cut the deepest. It was the broken trust. The idea that kindness could be turned into a weapon. Oliver sat there for a long time, staring at the wreckage of his good intentions, wondering how the world had become so twisted, and whether he had been foolish to believe in the goodness of strangers at all. The police officer stood in the middle of the wrecked living room, jotting down notes on a battered clipboard. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain tiredness in his eyes that spoke of seeing too many stories like this one. Oliver sat across from him, drained and hollow, recounting every detail he could remember about the woman and her children, though he realized now he knew almost nothing about them. No last name. No background. Just a desperate face in the rain that he had chosen to trust. The officer closed his notebook with a soft sigh. "We'll do what we can," he said, not unkindly. "But people like this, they know how to disappear." Oliver nodded numbly. It wasn't just about catching her. It was about coming to terms with what had happened. As the officer left, promising to stay in touch, Oliver found himself wandering aimlessly through his home, every overturned object a reminder of misplaced faith. By late afternoon, after cleaning up some of the debris and filing the insurance claims, Oliver sat on his back porch, sipping a cup of bitter black coffee. The city hummed around him, indifferent to his heartbreak. The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows over the cracked pavement. And then, something strange happened. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, lingering by the fence. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt. He looked lost, clutching a crumpled piece of paper tightly in his small hands. Oliver watched him for a moment before setting down his coffee and approaching carefully. "Hey there, buddy. Are you okay?" The boy flinched at first but then nodded. He held out the paper with trembling hands. Oliver unfolded it and stared. It was a handwritten letter, scrawled in a shaky, desperate hand. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I had no choice. They made me do it. Thank you for helping us when no one else would. Please don't lose your kindness because of me." There was no signature. No explanation beyond those few heartbreaking lines. Oliver's throat tightened as he glanced back at the boy. "Are you alone?" he asked softly. The boy shook his head and pointed across the street, where a frail figure, the same woman he had once helped, waited, half hidden behind a battered telephone pole. Her face was haunted, eyes rimmed with shadows, but unmistakably remorseful. 1,000 emotions surged through Oliver: anger, confusion, sadness. But most of all, an overwhelming weariness. He could have screamed. He could have called the police again. He could have demanded answers he might never fully understand. Instead, he simply folded the letter carefully and looked back at the boy. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The boy nodded hesitantly. "Come on, then," Oliver said, leading him inside. Later, as the boy ate quietly at the kitchen table, Oliver stared out the window, where the woman had disappeared once again into the evening mist. He didn't know if he would ever see her again. He didn't even know her real name. But somewhere deep inside, despite everything, a tiny ember of compassion refused to be snuffed out. He knew he could not change the whole world. But he could choose not to let the worst parts of it change him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. The house felt unusually still as night crept over the city, cloaking the streets in heavy darkness. Oliver sat alone at the kitchen table, the boy now asleep on the worn couch, wrapped in a thick blanket. His small chest rose and fell steadily, oblivious to the storm of thoughts swirling in Oliver's mind. He turned the crumpled letter over in his hands again, reading the words until they blurred. His heart ached with the weight of betrayal, yet the boy's innocence softened the edges of his anger. He thought about how easy it would have been to slam the door in their faces, to never extend a hand when he first saw them shivering in the rain. But if he had, what would have become of them? As the moon climbed higher, casting a silvery glow through the broken blinds, Oliver made a decision. He could not undo what had been done. He could not retrieve what had been stolen. But he could still choose who he wanted to be. The next morning, he called a few contacts he trusted, friends who ran community centers and shelters. With their help, he arranged a safe place for the boy and his mother to stay, somewhere she wouldn't have to resort to desperate, harmful choices again. Somewhere they could rebuild. When he gently woke the boy and explained everything, he saw a mixture of fear and hope in his wide eyes. The boy clutched the blanket tightly but nodded. He didn't ask any questions. Maybe he was too used to the sudden twists and turns life had thrown at him. An hour later, standing by the curb with a small packed bag, the boy turned to Oliver before getting into the van headed for the shelter. "Thank you," he said quietly. Oliver knelt down to meet his gaze. "You take care of your mom, okay? And remember, no matter what happens, you're not alone." The van pulled away, carrying a small part of Oliver's heart with it. He stood there long after the taillights disappeared, feeling the early morning sun begin to warm the chill from the night air. He returned to his home, to the mess and the memories, but also to a new kind of peace. His kindness had been used, yes. But it had also made a difference. It had meant survival for someone who had nothing else. Sometimes, kindness didn't guarantee a happy ending. Sometimes it only planted a seed that you might never see bloom. But that didn't make it any less important to give. At the end of the day, Oliver realized he would rather be the man who trusted too much than the man who had no trust left at all. And for every broken piece he picked up, for every loss he mourned, he knew one thing for sure: he had stayed true to himself. In a world that could be cruel and cold, that was a victory no thief could ever steal. This was Storytelling and Beyond. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional journeys that inspire the soul.